Esther, welcome back to Yo Quiero Dinero. I'm so excited to have you here on the show again because we are kicking off a new series. For those who don't know, go check out my Instagram. I've had a new addition to my family. I am now officially a mom and a mompreneur. And so in this new series, I'm going to be talking to amazing, badass mujeres who are out here balancing business and babies and all the things that come with that. So I'm so excited to have you here to talk about all that and more.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. Let's start off with an intro for folks who don't know who you are. And we're actually going to link the original episode that you were featured on the show in the episode show notes.
Nice. Okay, yeah. So I can give a little bit about myself. I would consider myself a mompreneur. Yes, I got 2 kids, 9, 11, and my husband actually has 2 older kids.
So you're a stepmom too?
Yeah, I'm a stepmom too. But they're in college, actually one of them was in post-college. So I definitely consider myself mompreneur, so I'm founder of BX Change. I consider it like a social enterprise. We do a bunch of different things, coaching, consulting. We also do workshops, but really about like supporting like the marginalized, the BIPOC, and helping them like every highest aspiration you want and to think of or dream about, make it into reality. And so that's really like our power.
I love that. And so your mission is very clear with your business. I think one of the things that I think back to when it comes to like the influence of my mom, I think back to her being very much rooted in like fear for her children. I think my mom definitely parented from a place of like trying to protect us from all the things. And I'm curious if you had that same experience growing up.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. I mean, well, I think I remember the last episode I talked about I almost died when I was 2, right? So then there was that whole other layer of my parents almost losing me and then getting money and then I surviving and then they immigrated and they lost all their stuff, right? Like multiple times.
Yeah.
So they lived, of course, in survival and fear and always with this thing, like we could lose it all in any second, but with not coming it from a growth mindset, like, hey, we can lose it any second. So let's keep building, but more of, I need to shelter you and like put you in a box. Mm-hmm. And so you need to only follow these set things because that's what's going to keep you safe and security. 100%.
Yeah. Are you the oldest child?
I'm not. I'm actually the 3rd, but we're so spaced out that my sister and I talk about this a lot that actually I have an older brother, but he was kind of, in and out. And so then my sister was the parentified eldest child. But then since we are 7 years apart and she left, I became the eldest, right? So I have a younger brother. So even though we both played the eldest child role, right? And so when she decided, okay, I need to go live my life, then it was like, okay, Esther, you're now the parentified child. And then that never ended. So
it does not end, y'all.
It doesn't end. No. So I think even with the mom entrepreneur, I even think of myself like, it's not just the mom to my kids. I'm like the mom to my parents.
Yo, facts. Right? Same here. And I think a lot of people listening can absolutely resonate with that. It's almost like we reverse roles as we get older and they get older. It's quite an interesting dynamic.
Oh, yeah. We're like the bridge.
All right. So I would love to know from you, like when you became a mom, what were some of the maybe perceptions that you had about what motherhood would look like versus like what you've actually experienced, right? Because for me, in some context, I always saw motherhood as like this thing that was very sacrificial, that like if you had goals and ambitions and dreams, good luck to you, but you ain't got time for that no more as a mom. And I'm wondering if that was your experience, because for me, it influenced me to believe for a long time that like I could not have a successful business, be out here living like my best life, and then also be a mom.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think like, there's even more there's so many layers, right? So like, I think, well, let's start my pregnancy. I thought, because, they sell you this thing that, like everything's going to be, I thought it was going to be this glorious and I was going to have this like, like the movies, like I was like, I'm going to glow and I'm going to be so happy and knit. I don't even know what I was thinking.
We glowing because we're sweating, because it's hot and we're carrying an extra 25 pounds.
I gained 100 pounds.
Oh my God.
So imagine it was like hormonal influx. So I was like wobbling, and then there was no glow. I felt sick all day. So already there was like a whole thing, like to my body, to me, because I couldn't function. I'm like a, high achiever, always like, doing stuff, and I could not function at the same rate. So then that started to get me to like believing these narratives, right? I was like, oh my God. So that means when I have already a pregnancy so rough, so that means when I have the child, it's going to be even worse, right? So how am I going to keep wanting to do all this stuff or my visions having kids? And I think also our families put a lot of pressure of you need to focus on being a parent. But luckily, like,
yeah. But also you got to bounce back, right?
oh,
You got to snap back in 2 weeks.
Oh, that too, right? Wear the faja, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not snapping back in 2 weeks. Exactly. And there was a lot of like those layers. Also, when I had my daughter, so she experienced a birth trauma, I actually liked your post about the hospital because it was the same thing. Like my first child, I went in my birth plan, my whole thing. This is how I wanted. And then, I started to have contractions early. And I remember the hospital did not care what I thought, did not listen to me. She almost died. And then she had to be in the NICU, this whole thing. So I already started getting that fear.
Which your mom experienced with you.
Exactly. So then I started to get really overprotective. And I started to fall into those same intergenerational traps. Okay. So I started to be like a bubble. No one can visit me. I got to protect all this stuff. And then finally, like my husband's like, I think we need to go to therapy. Let's go see someone because you don't even want to go outside. And then when I started to go to therapy, I realized I was basically doing the same pattern of being like, my daughter's weak because she experienced this. So I need to just protect her. And that's all I'm going to do and not go outside and become like this crazy germaphobe person. And then when she like told me that, she's like, you notice that you're doing the same thing? I was like, whoa. She's like, what if you change that narrative and instead be like, your daughter's so brave because she survived this. So imagine how strong she is. So imagine how much she can become if you open up. And just that tweak. And that's like a lot what our generation, our culture needs, right? These little tweaks.
The cycle breaking begins.
Exactly. Like it changed everything. Because then I started to be like, you're right. She's strong. Let me change the narrative. She can do things. She can overcome whatever we're going through right now. I can let go. I can spend some time by myself. So I think you were going back to that, like allowing ourselves with that mom guilt of time for ourselves, time to focus on our ambitions, time to focus with our partner, right? But by letting go of some of that, allowed me to put more space. And when I'm putting that space and doing my own things and living my purpose, then I was actually more present with her. But it's crazy, right? Because the minute we start going down that cycle and we start repeating the same patterns.
Yeah. And it can happen very subconsciously, right? Sometimes it does take that third party to like make you aware of, hey, this thing that you were talking about that you experienced growing up, you're doing the exact same shit. Hello.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not anxious. What are you talking about?
Well, and especially with your first, I can imagine because we're all just like learning as we go. And it's like, oh my God, you want to be like the perfect parent. And I think especially nowadays with social media, there's like such a comparison trap that I don't think that previous generations had to combat with, right? It's just like there is this perfect image of what motherhood should look like. And what I find is that a lot of people are just kind of faking it till they make it. And a lot of folks are going through it, but in private, but then like showing the highlight reel in public.
100%. And like every kid's different. Like our first one didn't sleep at all. So I was like, I look like a zombie. And then the second one slept. But I mean, they don't even talk about that. Like, hey, you're not going to sleep sometimes. And it's going to be exhausting. And it's hard to see sometimes the light in the situation. Like, I don't know when you're through it. But again, like you said, like, and then they're like, oh, are you feeding the right thing? Like, I was like, no, I'm not making homemade meals. I mean, you do what you can, right? And power to the ones that can, but everyone picks their battle of what can I spend my time and energy on, right? If the food nutrition part is really important to you, then great. But maybe it's other things, right? But I think that's a lot of what you're saying. A lot of the judgment comes in. Like if you're not doing or breastfeeding or farming, you know what I mean?
Everybody has an opinion.
Yes.
The struggle. And especially if you're Latino, because everybody wants to be all up in your business. Everything is like subject to the chisme. The unsolicited advice is everywhere, right? And so you kind of have to become your own guiding light, your own North Star, because everybody's going to have a say about what you're doing. And if you let that shit be the focus, it's going to drive you crazy.
Yeah, because you're never going to make anybody happy. It doesn't matter. You switch that one thing, then they have an opinion over the other thing, and it might not work for your kid, right? Every kid's different.
Absolutely. Okay, so you had a very high-powered career as a diplomat before becoming an entrepreneur. I'm curious because I think, again, there's a lot of women that think that they have to sacrifice career and that like professional success for motherhood. I'm curious if you had that perception, if you were kind of just of this belief system that, well, if I'm going to go out here and pursue all these accolades and professional goals, then motherhood is just, I'm not going to have the space for it.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think, and honestly, the society makes you believe that too. And even in the workforce, like I remember colleagues would be like, oh, you can't take that trip because you're breastfeeding or this and that. I'm like, I can get dry ice and go. But I'm like, first of all, you shouldn't be asking me that, right? Like, Funanito has a kid too. Why does it matter if I do or my breastfeeding schedule or any of that, any of your business, right? So there is a lot of opinion even in the work dynamic on what you can do as a parent, and they have their own belief systems that. So I did feel that I had to sacrifice. And I think in a way, I kind of bought that narrative a bit because I know I could have done more. In a way, I could have climbed faster, but I needed to do that work in myself of being like, stop listening to my exterior and everything. Everybody would be like, oh, you have time, just focus on the kids while they're small and then later pursue this promotion or this thing. And so I started to be like, okay, I'll slow it down. And in some cases during my pregnancy, I really couldn't do it at 500%. But afterwards I could. But fighting that whole narrative was really hard externally, like canceling that noise. And I think even for my family too, is like, you need to slow down. You need to just focus. And then there's the whole thing like, are you paying attention to your husband? You know, all those narratives, you know, you can't have one or you can't have both, but that's not true, right? I really believe in like work-life integration. And it's about what can I integrate at this time? And then once I did that work on myself, like, actually, no, and this is my time. And luckily I have a really supportive partner. It's like, this is your time. It's like a team playing game. I'll take more weight and you go after it. And that's how we did it, right? But I mean, it was true that as I'm like in the field, because a lot of us take a lot of the logistics. I would be in the field with ambassadors texting about like, did you guys pick up from the kids, whatever, baseball, you know? I mean, it's ridiculous. The mom management. And it's true, you are doing that at the same time. When someone asks you something, you're like, wait, I'm checking if the therapy schedule is not. So, and it's ridiculous. And people are like, why is your phone always ringing? I'm like, well, I'm juggling a bunch of things. But it's not that it's not doable. We can. Actually, I think our brains are wired for that because in the end, I was able to. I felt like comparison sometimes. My colleagues, I wasn't as overwhelmed when a lot of things would come to my plate because motherhood gives you that practice.
Yeah. You really get good at like balancing a lot of different roles and responsibilities. And I think, you know, one of the things you mentioned that is an underrated but very useful tool, if you will, in your toolkit as a mom is having a supportive partner. Like we need to be real upfront about how you literally cannot do this shit alone. Can you talk about that and what that dynamic has looked like for you and your husband as you've transitioned from a couple into parenthood?
I was married before, right? And I knew that as red flag with my first spouse. Like he was going to make me do everything. Very traditional, and his family was traditional. I thought at that time, I was like, I just don't want to have kids. And the truth is that as much as like I loved him and he had, you know, graduates, I just didn't want to have kids in that dynamic. I was like, I'm going to repeat. I always like to say, like, it's not all black and white. Like my dad, he did help in his own way in terms of our pursuits. But my mom did all the serving to him, cooking, logistics, and everything. She took 90% of the load. And so I was like, I can't have that dynamic because I saw all the sacrifice and resentment. More importantly, the resentment over time. And with my current part, we had the discussion from the beginning. I was like, because I wanted to have kids a little later, but he's older, and he was like, if we're gonna do it, we're gonna do it now. He's like, I already got 2. I'm already older. I need to have them now. Like, and he's like, we're not young. We're not spring chicken. And I was like, okay. But I was like, but if we're gonna do it this time at the height of where I wanted to climb in my career, I was like, well, then it's gonna be like that. And he's like, no, that was my last marriage. He does. So we talked about what do we like and don't like? What do we want to be sought out for? What do we enjoy? I I can do the logistics. I can do the multi things, right? I don't need to just do one thing at a time. He doesn't function as well with that. He likes, I want to do the child pickup. I want to do the cooking. I like the nurturing. I like the bedtime. I like the reading. I'm like, great. Because that stuff requires less multi and more like I'm in the zone. And I'm like, I'd rather you do that, you do that. So we split it. And it's actually worked out. We're a team. And it works out really well, right? And so it even like, are we morning people or we night people? I'm better at night. He's better in the morning. So even now we have that schedule. He does the morning drop off and the kids know. He's like, they're like, something's like, oh, mommy doesn't want to come so tired. He's like, no, it's better for all of us if mommy stays in bed and she does the afternoon or the later thing. And they're like, oh yeah, that's true. It's like a nice balance, but that is so key because we don't have resentment. Because he lived the opposite situation in his marriage where he did everything. He took 90% and she did 10. And so the fact that we're a team for both of us means that we appreciate and value each other. And so there's no resentment, no like eye rolling. It's more like high five. We got this. And plus when things are like, because the truth is like kids, it's like a shit show sometimes. And we can both look at each other and laugh going, oh my God.
I love that dynamic. And I love the fact that you guys talked about this in the beginning of a relationship, especially when I think about what the normal conversations are around preparing for a child. It's like, okay, who do we want to invite to the baby shower? Or like, what color are we painting the nursery? And it's like, those are not the questions you need to be asking. Okay. You need to be asking like, who's taking the night shift? Who's taking the day shift? Who's going to take time off of work? Like, what are we doing with our lives? How are we going to make this shit work? It is not just like a freaking gender reveal, a cute little party, and then like baby's here and you're just going to figure shit out.
Exactly. Oh, 100%. And then it's like, also like, how is this going to affect her like professional, like career aspirations, right? We kind of knew even when I was like a diplomat, I was like, I already was always like, I want more, but it was like, okay, well, this is when we can do that. And so we already like kind of knew like who's going to do what, who's going to do when, like even mapping it out, like the 5-10 years. And I think sometimes we're so stuck in like right now. And it's like, okay, no, we got to like have these deeper conversations in the beginning. Like, how are we going to tag team?
All right. So let's talk about your entrepreneurial journey because now you are a business owner. How the heck did you manage to transition into entrepreneurship while also balancing motherhood and marriage, all the things? I have a lot of clients who are moms and who, when they think about the idea of starting a business and then like balancing that with everything else that's going on in life, it just feels literally impossible.
I mean, that's why I think it takes planning. Like, I think it's not something like everyone's like, oh, that everyone just decides. No, you have to plan it. And so like, I think for me, I already had that itch for like 2 years. But I also had, like, because my daughter being born earlier, she had to do all these intensive therapies for 5 years, right? And then I knew the plan from the psychoeducation specialist. They were like 5 years. So I was already like, okay, like my husband, I sat down, okay, 5 years, I'm going to stay in this job. But at the end, I also wanted to grow in the job. But I was like, we have to stay in those 5 years for sure to pay for all this stuff. Fine. But after that's done, I'm going to start looking like, how do we plan this, right? So we kind of knew already there. We're like, okay, let's start exploring. How could this look like? And at first, like, who also is more urgent to leave first? So my husband and I were both in the service and he decided to leave first. And I was like, okay, so while you leave, I will still have the insurance, all those other things, whatever. But then it got to a point where I'm like, but I'm doing this short term. I'm not going to like stay in this prison or, golden handcuffs for how I felt it. But for other people, it's not. I would say disclaimer. But for me, it was because I knew I wanted to do this other thing. So, but we planned it out. Okay. Well, one, I was like, we have all these other, school. It's like reality, right? We have to pay for private school. We know we have to pay for certain expenses that goes with that. We know we have health insurance that we have to have for them, right? All these things. So we made a map that we were like, okay, you know what? We're going to sacrifice for a year, put that money away. And then so that I could take the leap, right? And so when I took the leap, I had those essentials covered and we downsized. So sometimes when I talk to entrepreneurs, they want to keep the same lifestyle the first year. We went from a huge house, right? That was part of my career, 6-bedroom to a 2-bedroom because I wanted to grow and do this thing without the stress of having to have that same expenses and lifestyle thing I gave the staff that was working for us 6 months to transition. So that for me was my transition to entrepreneurship. It was planning. And it was like, okay, let's live like only to the basics that first year. Since that first year, you're testing, you're seeing, you're growing. That way I don't feel scared to jump into things, right? But I also knew myself. I have the high achiever fear of losing everything I've built, right? Everyone telling me it's a terrible thing to do. Don't leave your security job. All those narratives that I had to come up with this plan that I wouldn't feel like I was losing everything, right? And all my financial security and things.
Yeah. No, that's real. I love the intentionality behind what you're saying because, I think there's a lot of this like, just jump out of the plane and figure it out later narrative around entrepreneurship sometimes. And I'm just like, that's nice if you have like a trust fund.
Exactly.
That's nice if you have generational wealth that you can like go and do an eat, pray, love year of exploration with your life. But if you're a first gen person who's literally your own financial safety net and you want to make this transition, you definitely need to have a plan. And especially when you have a family involved, it's totally different even when it's just you versus like you and your husband and your kids. And like, there's a lot more at stake.
Exactly.
Okay. So not only have you transitioned into entrepreneurship, but you actually like relocated out of the country, which I think is an incredible feat in itself. I think a lot of people think about it, but just the logistics of not just uprooting yourself, but your family and like starting a new life in a new place while also running a business, while also being a mom. Talk me through that. Kind of what was the initial draw to make that decision and how has it influenced not only you as a business owner, but maybe you as a mom as well?
Yeah. When I was in the career of the diplomat, we were already overseas, right? So we had been in Nicaragua, Jamaica, and we had actually spent some time in the Dominican Republic. But when I thought about jumping into entrepreneurship, part of the math numbers, right, was like, where can we make this work? Where one, I could feel that I was not cutting so much of the lifestyle, but also giving myself some of that peace and inspiration. And since we had lived already overseas, we knew that all that narrative about like, it's not safe, of course it depends on which country, but there are countries you could do that where it's safe and inviting and people are nice and your kids can go to school and all those things. So we kind of already knew that it's feasible. So when I quit my job, it was December 31st and we signed a lease on December 14th. So for our apartment. And so we moved like literally December 31st, like January 1st, right? So like that was when we hired Ramoncito, which has a little like tiny pickup truck. I don't know if you've ever been to DR, they have these little pickup trucks. He did our move 5 times with our stuff. We filled up we were coming from a 6-bedroom house. So that we had to fill up the whole entire part with our stuff. And I had to do it little by little, give things away and transition. And also like at first I felt panic attack. And I think most people do. Like I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Is this the right thing? I'm living in a new neighborhood. I don't know. All that overwhelming feeling of something when you're doing something new. But then I had to sit down and be like, no, like this place it's safe. It has great community. It's going to be good for like us. And plus I wanted to live walking distance to school. So even when I was thinking about like the US, I had such a hard time finding a neighborhood I could live and still have a lot of savings that was walking distance to a really good school. And so I could not find that the way I always tell people, picture your perfect day. And my perfect day was, one, I have a building that I can go to the gym upstairs. I don't have to go very far. Everything around me is 15-minute walk and I can walk to school, right? And then when I started looking at where can I construct that dream day, it wasn't there in the US. But rather than going, oh no, it's not in the US, so I can't do it, I was like, where can I do that? And then I was like, oh, I can do that in Santo Domingo. So that's what we did. So we picked the location based on that. And then like after 2 weeks of living the whole like structure, I was like, this is amazing, especially coming from like the job I was at. We were like an hour from the school. My kids I had to pay for a drive. It was like so many layers to now having like simplicity and peace of mind. And like the kids were happy because they didn't have to they still had their friends. Like all that comes to play about like the family being at peace, then you can be at peace, right? And then I could be at peace working on the business, on the entrepreneurship. And then of course there's added benefits, right? If you have a home abroad, you qualify for the tax incentive So as an entrepreneur, if you're overseas, you save so much on taxes too. So there's all these like added layers. Plus, I see the ocean.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm like, also, you're in a tropical paradise, which, it's hard to find that in the United States. And I would argue, even as somebody that lives in Florida, this place has many things. I don't think I'd necessarily classify it as a tropical paradise. We got the ocean and stuff, but it's just a different vibe when you're out there in the Caribbean. It's just a different atmosphere. It's a different ambiance, the people, the culture. It's a lot different.
Yeah. And I don't have to deal with school shootings.
Yeah.
There's layers.
Where were you living before you moved to DR?
Well, before DR, we were in Jamaica, but in the States, like I still have like my mom's place as also like our, like our business is registered there, and we do a lot through Miami and then DC. But when I was looking at Miami, it's a place for school. It's hard. It was hard. And like my sister lives there, but it's like, that's why you have to do that math yourself, right? But for us, it just works better for the family. I don't know if it's going to be permanent. It works for us now. I always tell everybody we assess it year by year, depending on where the kids are in their life and where we are and our needs.
How old were your children when you made the move?
So when I quit was 4 or 5 years, right? So my kids are 11 and 9.
So that's the ages that they were going to DR?
No, well, we had been to the DR since 2017, but we moved to the other side of the city. So it was a total new everything.
Yeah. So I'm curious because, at that age, kids have already kind of formed relationships and friendships and things like that. Was there a pushback to making the move?
We talk about it with them. We even revisit every year. Like, do you want to stay or do you want to go? And where do you want to go? Because they're always torn. And I think everyone experiences this. Like my sister lives in Miami. They're super close to their cousins, right? And so they're always torn. We go because we spend a lot of time in Miami too, going back and forth. They're like, oh, my cousins. But then here they have their friends. But the transition was hard for them the first 6 months because they were used to the house and a yard. And we lived in a compound where they could just roam and they could be like, there was a pool and this and that. So we moved from that to like the city center. And so from changing from that to urban was a big change. But at the same time, when my daughter did this really cool hypnotherapy, right? And she was drawing her past, her present and future. She put that in the past because our house was so big that she didn't really spend that much time with mommy. And since I was like going to events that would take much more commute, she felt she hardly saw me, and she put in present. She's like, I likes the small space. We get to do more stuff together and showing her happy. So I was like, so in the end, I'm like, the change was good, right? But I think the first 6 months, right, it's everyone transitioning, right? Space and place. And I mean, what we learned from the diplomat from service of moving so much, it takes a year to like fully adjust.
Yeah. I've noticed that too. When I was looking for my place in Puerto Rico, like I spent over a year really getting to know the neighborhood, staying in different places, like really orienting myself and immersing myself in the local community, because that's really the only way that you can figure out like if you're in the place that you're meant to be.
Exactly. It needs to click.
Yeah. Okay. So you are clearly out here like living your purpose now with your business, intentionally designing your life. I want some of your advice now based on not only your personal experience, but also the experience and what you help your clients with of just really like creating their dream lives. There's a lot of moms who listen to this show who feel like their entire identities are wrapped up in motherhood, and they've somehow lost the ability to envision themselves as anything else. What's your best advice for maybe folks to kind of unravel that and reclaim a little bit of themselves so that they can get back to not just being a mom, but being like a human?
And it can, like, especially when different stages, it can kind of feel that way, right? Like when they're babies, you feel that way. You feel like, oh my God, am I just a cow? And then, and like later too, even, right now I'm a preteen. I'm like, oh my God, am I just like dealing with her hormones? But at the same time, though, like a lot of moms do come to me with that. Or even when I do workshops, I ask people about their childhood dream a lot and give me their characteristics of it. Like when I just do a vision board, and I make the explicit example that they cannot use their family members because they always want to say their mom, their dad, or tío abuelo. And I'm like, no. Like, who did you really like admire and look up to? And it takes them a second, right? And it's like even just getting them out of that narrative that it can only be like our nucleus family that you look up to. And so because then this like kicks down the pressure of like we feel like, oh well, our kid has to look up to us and my whole identity needs to be like this super mom and I need to do everything and I need to be like super everything. So the first question is that kind of like dismantling that a little bit, remembering who they were, who they like wanted to be, those characteristics that they still embody and are today, right? Because that's a trick question, right? Who they say and the characteristics, that's who you are, right? And so it's reminding them that's who you are. And then I do these exercises like unpacking your superpower, right? So like if you had $40 billion, global problem would you solve? And a lot of them were like, whoa, I don't think I've been asked that in years. It's like, okay, so what would you solve and how? And then I'm like, okay, that we unpack. That's how you solve problems in the order. Now let's go back to your life. How have you done that in the past, in the present, the future? And then they realize, oh my God, that's how I solve problems every day, even as a mother. But mother, the title is not your identity. Your identity is how you like to show up in the world, how you solve problems, that you do that with your friends, you do that with everyone. You did that before when you were like a student, a kid, a thing, and you could continue doing that. So like, how do you want to use that in the future? Right. So it's like slowly taking away from like our societal push to like put us in titles and boxes. You can be a mother at the same time as a coupon guru, as a entrepreneur, as anything you want. These titles are just things, but what is like your uniqueness that you want to be sought out for, that you want to use, what kind of change you want to bring, whether in your family or outside. And so that is the advice I would have, is like unpack that a bit, because it could feel that way. But the truth is you are solving things every day. You are bringing your uniqueness in the way. It's just hidden in all the noise and the craziness of the day to day. So like it's necessary to pause and do these reflections, because if not, you get sucked in. Like I call it the logistic sand. You can get sucked in that all day and it's never ending.
I think it's so important for us to all do that exercise as moms, because what I've found oftentimes, especially like with the older generations, is that once their children are grown, it's almost like the identity is lost now, because it's like, I've just been a mom. Like I haven't done any exploration of like, what do I like? What are some, freaking hobbies that I have? What are some interests? Like, what do you do outside of being a mom? And I think that causes a lot of like this existential crisis that we see in older folks who, once their kids leave, it's like they're depressed. It's that empty nest syndrome. So it's not just important for you to do that work so that you're not wrapping up your whole identity, but the fact is that at some point your children are not going to be your focus. And like, what have you done to cultivate those other aspects of your life so that you have a purpose beyond parenthood?
Oh, 100%. And I even coach people in their 70s, right? In their 60s when they become empty nesters, because they feel, everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to have all this time and I'm just going to know what to do. No, if you haven't nurtured it, you get to that point and you're lost. So then we have to do all that work there. But then they're like, oh my God, I could have been building as I was going and not losing like touch with that. And I see it with the generation. I mean, I even see it in my own family, right? Like that also becomes then the unhealthy attachment with your older children too. And so many of us that are in that bridge, we feel that pull on both sides, right? And we sometimes wish like our parents would be more independent or would have those networks and things. But then at the same time, we're like, well, they didn't have a chance to do that work, right? So it's up to us to do that work. So also that our kids then are not fulfilling our unfulfilled purposes.
Talk about it. That is so real.
Because that's what happens. We transfer it on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I feel like there's just so many things that we've talked about that are like triggering people as they're listening to this, because you're either experiencing this as the child of a parent, or you are a parent who is realizing, oh shit, I'm doing this to my child. So you know what, y'all, that's the whole point of this show. We are here to just make you aware of some things so that you start jotting down, maybe there's some areas of my life that I want to work on.
And it's a journey, man.
It is a journey. When it comes to entrepreneurship, one of the things that I was very clear on very early in my journey is that the way that corporate America is structured is not conducive to parenthood. When we think about the fact that there is no paid paternal leave requirement, the school system is set up so that the hours don't even match up with like what you're supposed to work as a 9 to 5, the lack of healthcare without employment, the list goes on and on, the unaffordability of childcare. I'm curious, did entrepreneurship play into like how you wanted to show up as a mom? Like, was that a part of why you wanted to pursue it?
Oh, absolutely. Because also, well, two reasons, right? I felt like we were just talking about the last thing, right? The unfulfilled purposes, right? When I started to do that work, I realized my unfulfilled thing that I kept on saying I would do in retirement was entrepreneurship. And I was like, I don't want to pass that on to my kids, that then I'm going to push them towards that because I didn't do it, right? They need to see that I was able to take a leap and do it and then follow me in the journey, right? There's no better teaching than mirroring. And so that was one. And then the second thing is that I wanted to be part of the pickup or drop off, right? Look, I mean, more part of the pickup. We were talking about that. But at least I get to be part of that. I can go to the shows, right? As entrepreneurship, that gives you that flexibility that, hey, today I don't want to work mornings. I'm going to block it and I'll work the nights instead, but I get to go to her show, her thing, or his show, his thing. And even right now they have different interests. Like my son's pursuing, I can go with him to like something, right? It gives you that flexibility. So I get to be more present. I don't have to be in an office. And then because I'm more present, I'm not commuting. All of that goes to play. So yeah, that was a big part of my decision. And plus, like, I enjoy being around my husband. So even part of the play was like, we want to work together. I want to see you. I want to like have lunch with you. Like when I was working in the office, I'd be slammed that we couldn't have lunch. Even in the same org, I would never see him during the day. And we would have to outsource so much, like to other, like, with childcare and nanny things. He was like, I want to raise my kids. I want to be there. Because then we started to outsource some cooking. He's like, I miss cooking. And so those were part of our own decisions, was to be present. The other thing too is when I had my kids, there was no maternity leave. So even like, I know some jobs offer it now and things like that, but I mean, it was a punch in the gut, right? Like to go months and you don't know if you're going to have a kid early or later. I don't know why in the United States does not offer that everywhere, because both kids took huge financial hit. While like, I feel like now with entrepreneurship, since I know health insurance is on me, I know those things. I actually feel less vulnerable than I did when I had a job. Because now I'm like, I know I have to plan the $24,000 a year for health insurance. So it's already in my plan. I'm not worried about someone else dictating whether I'm going to have or not. I know these expenses are coming, so I know that I have to plan for them. It's like a false sense of safety.
Yeah, it's the golden handcuffs, as you say. It just keeps you comfortable, not necessarily free, which is not the same thing.
And not growing.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what strategies do you use to maintain a balance between parenting and managing a business? Because I would argue that both of them require so much of your time and energy and brain space and decent amounts of sleep.
Yeah, they totally do. And I think it's like I would say it's like managing a relationship, parenting, plus the entrepreneurship, right? And yourself. I feel like I have to balance all four. And I literally have color-coded calendar. And I know people are like, oh, that seems unflexible. But the truth is it creates flexibility for me, because then I'm not worried. I don't have any guilt. I don't worry about it because it's already scheduled and I have this discussion. So even with the kids, I'll be like, okay, you get to have one activity a week with undivided attention. Not just like the usual, like, oh, we're eating and things like that. Like, what do you want to do? Right. Or even when they were little, I would plan it before they could, give their opinions. But like, let's say now. And then they'll say, I want to go to this arcade, or I want to go and spend 2 hours with you walking around here, or I want to go out to eat. Okay, we schedule it. We spend the month. Okay, this is your time. And because they both don't like the same things, this is your time. This is your time. And then with my husband, I'm like, okay, you want once a month, we're going to spend a staycation, me and you. When are we going to do that? Right? Because they say you have to have, I remember I read this book once. It was like 777. It was like, out of every 7 days, you should have one meal together. Out of every 7 weeks, you should have like a overnight type thing. And then it says every 7 months, you should take some sort of vacation.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
It's a nice math, right? If you like to plan. So I was like, okay, every week we're going to have a meal, just me and you, whether it could be lunch, right? And then every 7 weeks, we'd have a staycation. And then every, 7 we can think about like a 3-day weekend thing. I don't know. We could figure that out, or once a year do a bigger thing. So we keep to that. We're like staycation, where it's just like, we're not going to talk about the business or the kids. We're going to talk about each other, right? For 24 hours. We plan it out. But because it's planned out, I can balance it. And then I have me time. I also plan out my own time, like my own time that I watch a whole show, right? And I have like some time for journaling, my own things blocked off. So I block it all off, and then it keeps me committed to it. And then that way also everyone's already been part of that discussion. So they all know the expectation. I always tell them we check in every week. Like, how's it going? Did this work? Feedback. They're like, yeah, that still works. Great. And then if it doesn't work at one point, we adjust. But I think that's the only way I've been able to work it for myself. It's that way of managing it. And then the business happens all in between that time, right?
Yeah, and I think this is a perfect segue into discussing, like, what does your support system look like and how have you structured that? Because you need assistance in your business and you need assistance in parenting. You're not next to your immediate family, right? Being in the Dominican Republic. So like, how have you structured your support system?
Yeah, it's hard, right? So like the support system I was like, we knew we needed was like, I need someone, I hate cleaning. I was like, I'm going to pay cleaning. So we have like a cleaning lady that comes twice a week, but she also babysits. We know with events, I can't worry about the kids. Like we run events here. I'm like, I need a babysitter and she'll sleep over and be there. Great. So that she's a major part of our support system. And so we make sure to make her stay happy, keep happy, right? But then like with things that I have to travel longer periods of time where we both do, that's when we drop off the kids in Miami. And then we'll leave them there, like with my mom, and she'll like watch them. And that's what I'll do for longer things. Cause I don't feel as comfortable. I'm like, that's when the Latina, where my mom's voice comes in. Oh, there's going to be an earthquake, a hurricane, and you left them. And so I've done it a couple of times, but things that I'm like, I don't want that anxiety or her calling me going. I just like, okay, I'll just drop them off. So I do have that system for the support. But then even like other things, it's like there's an errand service here that I'm like, you know what? I don't want to go across town to run errands. So that's something I pay for that really helps with the day to day. And so it's different for everyone, but those are like main things. When they were smaller, I had to have full-time help. It's all about that. And then like, and then my husband has the older kids. Before he would have to fly more to attend to that. But now that they're older, he doesn't have to do that as much. So there's like time and seasons. And since they're a little older, more independent, it also makes the expenses and the stuff that we have to have in a support system a little less. But so we've kind of weighted that out a bit.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think there's this perception, especially with people, again, only like showing the highlight reels, that you should be doing all this on your own, right? And there's a lot of this like mom guilt that people are inflicted with because they trying to be super mom. And it's like, I promise you, first, it's not realistic. Secondly, even the people that look like they're doing this shit alone, they're likely not doing it alone. There's some level of support that's happening that makes their lives look perfect on social media. So like, let's keep it real, because it takes a village.
It takes a village. And you have to like it too. Like, I'm not interested. Like, I know some moms love being the PTA mom. That's never going to be interesting for me. I'm never going to like it. I don't like Mama Mafia, any of that stuff. So I'm on the groups and I've told the moms that it's not me. So why don't you, if you guys love it, you guys organize it, I'll throw money at the prom, but I'm not going to be the one to do that. But there's other ones that love it, right? That enjoy it. So I think it's like, it's less about like, let's not do it all. Let's do the parts that are aligned with us, that we enjoy. Because if not, then you're just burning yourself out and you're saying yes to things you don't even want to do.
Yeah. I would love your advice for women who are dealing with the mom guilt or who are dealing with the judgment of being a working mom, because I think there's this idea that you're just supposed to drop everything. And that's not realistic, first of all, for most people. And especially when we look at like the toxic narratives that I'm seeing on social media with like being trad wives, where like you sacrifice all your financial stability to like be a stay-at-home mom because that's the responsible thing to do. What do you say to women who are being judged for the fact that they don't just want to do the mom thing and they want to be a working mom?
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is about what do you want to mirror and what do you want to teach your kids, right? And I think for me, seeing my mom work was huge for me. seeing her work and make her own money, right? And I know there's like this constellation exercise like you do with about your parents, about did they make money and did they keep money? And it's really important for kids to see people make money somehow, right? And I think we underestimate that. Not that I'm trying to slam if staying at home mom is your thing, but there is something really important developmentally about seeing someone make money and keep money. And so when you're like feeling that guilt, just think about what are you passing on? You're passing on that one, you're teaching them independence, you're teaching them how to make money, keep money, be smart with money, invest in money, that there's possibilities. Like even when I published my book out, my kids start to be like, oh, I can probably write a book too. Or like they start to see that it's in their sphere. And so the more things that we can do, the more they can see that it's within their possibilities, right? So the ones that I feel mom guilt, I'd be like, no, look at the example you're giving. You're giving independence. You're showing that you can have a career, you can have a family, right? And it depends on what you want to instill. And then the ones who do want to be stay-at-home moms, and that's the message they want to send, right? That you can be nurtured, whatever. But it's everyone's narrative is different, and so I would say like ignore that noise, because I'm sure you're working is because you're ambitious, you like it, you want your own freedom, you want independence. So I assume you want your kids to have that lesson too.
I love that. That living by example and teaching by example is such a powerful thing. I know it definitely influenced me in seeing my dad like out here without a college degree, like creating a whole career as an engineer. That really showed me that like anything is possible. And so even when you're not specifically communicating the message to your children, they are watching everything that you do and taking that as cues as to like what is possible for them.
Exactly. And that's actually more powerful than you just sitting there talking to them. They're looking at what you're doing.
Yeah. Last question for you before we close this out. What personal growth have you experienced in balancing motherhood and entrepreneurship?
I think the personal growth that I've had is really stopping and being like, okay, is this aligned with me? Why am I doing this? And am I also listening to the kids? And I mean it like, because sometimes with entrepreneurship or like with my life when I'm balancing all four, I start to be like, oh, the kids, because I learn more stuff in entrepreneurship. I'm like, oh, they should also learn it too. Like, this is also really important for them to learn and look at this new thing. And like, I want to pass on all that knowledge to them, and I have to like stop and be like, wait, what is in alignment with them? What are they looking to be interested in? And so I have to like stop and check myself. And then I have to also stop and be like intergenerational things and stop myself and being like, is this a narrative that I'm passing down? Is this something that, am I trying to like push down something? Like, so I think the entrepreneurship, because when entrepreneur, you're trailblazing. You don't have a map. You don't have a roadmap. So I'm constantly pushing into my intuition about the business, but I have to also do the intuition checking on how I'm doing with motherhood. Sometimes I just want to do it with the entrepreneurship, and even being a parent requires you to do the inner work, because we are passing even simple things like affection. Like I grew up with affection for my dad, but not so much my mom. And I noticed that I was passing that down to my daughter, not to my son. And I'm like, why am I doing that? Right. So it's like doing those checks of like, where does that come from? What am I doing? So it's making sure that we're doing it on all spheres of our life, because my default is like just on entrepreneurship, because that's something that I know that I'm like, oh, I have to generate, has metrics. Parenthood has no metric.
Right. Yeah. You just want to end up with like decent human beings out in the world.
Yeah. But we realize as us now, right? Like that all those little things affect us later, right? We're constantly overcoming our childhoods. So I have to like do checks of like, I'm sure there's still going to be things like, of course, that they go to.
Yeah. They're going to go to therapy regardless of how good we try to do it, but it's fine.
They go weekly now, right? But I mean, it's more like, but still, it's more like I need to check, like do those checks on myself on what do I want our dynamic to be? And what's my vision of the relationship I want to have with them older? Because I got to develop that now, right? We can't expect, because I see that with my older clients, right? They're like, I want this relationship. I'm like, but did you start that younger? Did you guys do that work together? No. And so it's so much harder later when they're adults than if you start dealing with it now on like creating that strong bond from when they're small.
That is real. If somebody would have told me that between parenthood and entrepreneurship, I'd be going on the deepest journeys of personal development. I mean, there is nothing in the world that will force you to confront your shit like starting a business and having a child.
Oh, yeah. Everything. Entrepreneurship already slams you with that. And then parenthood, boom, is another slam.
There you go.
Yeah. Confront all your demons.
I love it. Esther, this conversation has been so amazing and inspiring. I know folks are going to want to learn more about you and the work that you do. So tell us where we can find you and what are some resources that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah. You can find me on Instagram, be, act, change, right? Be yourself, take action, change the world. And then a resource that just fell on the floor, but I'm going to get it, is I have this really good workbook. So I have a book, but the workbook, Creating Your Limitless Life, is something that you can do. And I have it in English and Spanish. You can do that with your parent or your kid, even once they're able to like articulate. But even just doing it yourself, right? It helps you unpack like all those questions, right? About the childhood dream, the legacy you want to build, what's your dream day, and map out the next 5 years. You could do it with your partner if you have one, right? But it helps to create already like those plans we talked about, that structure, the introspective questions. And I have it that you can also do with your parent because like we were talking about, you're reflecting a lot of generations. And so just even understanding your own parents, what did they go through? What is all this stuff? What was the unsolved things gives you clarity too.
Amazing. And you can learn more about Esther and her work at beactchange.com. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you for kicking off our Mompreneur series. I am so excited for folks to tune into this episode and really just be inspired to understand that it's not about having to choose. We can have it all. And it's really just about taking that intentional step to plan so that you can have the experience that you want, both as a business owner and as a parent as well.
Absolutely. This is awesome. Thank you.